Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Wormwood, The Star, out May 31st on Black Lodge Records. The album has 7 tracks, 47 minutes in length, and this is the band's 4th full-length studio album. They are a Swedish melodic black metal band. Now, this album is part 3 of a trilogy that's been going on for the past 2 records, obviously finishing off with this one. A trilogy that it's all about death in different time periods, if you will, or with different backdrops, but all of them with that same commonality of death. This one is about the end of the universe, and there's definitely death associated with that. So it's a different take, and it's a take that kind of takes death into a much larger scale. I mean, one thing is to talk about a period of time in your history where there was famine, where there was death. The other is to talk about death within your own planet. And then the last, but definitely not least, to talk about death in a more global scale, planetary scale, with the end of the universe, definitely takes things into a different perspective. Now, as far as the design is concerned, I thought the design on this record really tied in well with the storytelling aspect of the album, with the concept of the album. And it's a design that doesn't really offer... It doesn't really offer anything that's not necessary. There's no interludes, there's no intros, there's no outros. It's just really a record that tries to tell a story, that tries to be engaging with a listener and take you along for the ride, for the journey that is ahead of you, so that you can understand all the steps that have been taken towards that final climatic end moment of our universe. So it's a nice design that enhances definitely the idea behind the album. Now, once it comes to the sound, I think there's been a gradual process across all 3 records within this trilogy. This one, in my humble opinion, is the one that has the biggest sound. It has the brightest and biggest sound. This doesn't mean that the album is not heavy. This doesn't mean that the album is not dark. Both of those elements are still present here, and the DNA of the band, the core DNA of the band, is still present on every single song. The changes that I felt that this record offer is that the tracks are not consistently dark, and they're not consistently introspective. There's a little bit more brightness. There's a lot more brighter moments within these songs, which allows the tracks to feel a lot bigger. But when you're talking about the universe, you're not talking about your city, you're not talking about your country, you're not talking about your planet. So creating songs that feel a little bit larger than life goes really well with the thought process behind the theme, behind the concept. So I understand this change in sound, or this evolution in sound, to fit better with the theme, to fit better with the concept of the record. Keeping the DNA of the band, keeping the darkness of the band, specifically the guitar sound. I think this band is really defined first and foremost by their guitar sound. So keeping that as intact as possible across 7 songs, it's very important for you to still see who they are, and not completely have an album that disconnects from the previous records and is part of a trilogy. I think you have to keep all of that in mind. I think you have to keep in mind that you have to connect these 3 records together. You have to connect them to who the band are, and then you have to give them the specific nuances and the specific individual fingerprint that represents the concept. And I felt this album does that by keeping those guitars alive and well with that dark DNA behind them, with that grime specifically. When they're heavier, when they're more melodic, they still found ways of including darkness within the melody of the songs, within the melody of the guitars. But the melody, more often than not on this album, either be from the guitars or from the synths, really opens up and allows the tracks to breathe differently. It airs them out, if you will, in a much different way. There's not as much dark innuendos or atmosphere in the melodic side of this record as I've seen in previous records. In previous records, the melody sometimes was the root cause of the darkness. Not as much on this album. That dynamic is shifted, but it matches the concept and matches the execution in terms of what they're trying to represent musically. Now, the drums on this album pair up really well with the guitar sound, specifically on the thicker side, on the heavier side of this record. The two create a nice substance, and the drums overall create a very nice substance that gives some oomph to this album, so that even when the songs are brighter or bigger, a little bit more open, the drum sound is giving still a little bit more foundation so that sound can open up, but the song doesn't feel thin. It's important to create this sense of size, but keeping in mind that just because you're creating size and you're stretching out the footprint of the songs, you still have to put something within that basket. Otherwise, you have an empty basket, and then the tracks feel very thin. So the drums did a wonderful job creating that consistency that's so important, specifically if you're going to create the sound that they created for this record. Vocally, I think you're going to find the consistency of the past is in the present. This album offers that sense of consistency throughout, outside of the nuances of having a little bit more of a narrator style approach or having the vocals a little bit deeper in the mix. Nuances that are important from a concept standpoint. Outside of those ripples, the vocals are super consistent from beginning to end. And I also enjoyed some of the backing vocals and choir style approach that they created. That way you're not only creating size with your more melodic sound, you're also creating size and making these songs bigger and allowing them to breathe a little bit better on a vocal side, from a vocal standpoint. So this creates a much more harmonious dynamic between all the elements that the album has to offer, and you're not just using the sound to do it, you're using everything at your disposal. Now, when I look at this record, it's an album that really represents well its concept. Having said that, I preferred the opening record within this trilogy because the darkness that album had, that sense of despair almost, or that sense of hopelessness, not that it wasn't present in the other albums, but the way it's represented on this record, on that record, felt more natural to me. It felt more organic. This one, because you're still talking about death at a much larger scale, but you're kind of going into hypotheticals. You're going into an area where you're not really sure how it's going to be, how it's going to feel, how it's going to happen, versus talking about something that you may not have experienced, but feels a little bit closer to home. So this album feels less organic from that standpoint. It feels more pushed into a certain direction and really driven by its concept. So it's an album that musically is driven by a concept, not the concept is driven by its music. That's the perception that I get, and that's one of the reasons why I felt a little bit more disconnected from this record than I felt, for example, from the previous two. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with A Distant Glow, melodic guitar opening that leads into this more atmospheric sound with these vocals really at the distance, creating a sense almost of serenity. There's definitely a sense of distant as the song starts, as the song gets going, and then you start to see a more explosive nature happening within the track, and that experience leads into a very dark undertone, and that dark undertone is really driven by the guitar melody. The drums complete the overall sound, the vocals are very aggressive, and once the song becomes bigger, those vocals are not at the distance anymore. They come out of the shadows and they have a direct impact on the track. The melodic sound it gives the guitars more of a clear direction and a linear progression, even though this is not a linear song. This is a song that evolves, but it has an evolution based on linearity, which makes the song very compact and very cohesive. Next we have Galactic Blood. This track definitely has a little bit more of a sci-fi element to it. The keys on this track offer that almost sci-fi atmosphere that's interlaced with the darker, heavier guitar sound, from start to finish. And then you start to see some of these sound drops coming into the song, which are really interesting because those drops not only add to the atmosphere of the track, they also add to the darkness of the track. And this creates a very cool texture throughout the entire song, allowing the vocals to really drive this track. Even though the guitars sound amazing, even though the song has a great solo, the vocals really feel like the main protagonist behind this song and the main driver of the experience. Last but definitely not least, Suffer Existence. Very dynamic, tremendous vocal tracks on this song. I love, first of all, I love the heavy sound of the track, and I love the more clear melodic moments that are mixed in within that heaviness, within that chaos. It's a song that has a lot of chaos in it, and that chaos is really represented by that heavier sound. The strings add clarity, or try to cut through that chaos and add some clarity. And it's a track that both musically and vocally It's so powerful. It's so textured, so many layers to it. It's a song that has a really cool aspect to it. It has really cool elements, and it's very memorable because it feels completely different, both musically and vocally, from any other track that this album offers. It's a song that really stands out based on its own uniquenesses. Wormwood with The Star, out May 31st on Black Lodge Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section, and I'll be seeing you all at the next video. Take care, guys.